It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. You can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting, either through my website, emailrevealer.com. You just email me directly at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. Our guest today is Brett Harper. He's written a book called Spare the Rod, A Troubling Look at the Troubled Teen Industry. You can find him on Facebook, at Exposing Agape Boarding Schools. You can also find him on Twitter at the same thing, Exposing Agape Boarding Schools. And his own personal website is SpareTheRodNP for nonprofit.com. Mr. Brett Harper, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Oh, hi.
Great, man. Thank you so much. Before we get into your book here, Spare the Rod, A Troubling Look at the Troubled Teen Industry, and all the topics, your experience at this horrible Agape boarding school, and what's happening to all these other kids. Tell us about yourself. Who is Brett Harper?
Well, I'm just a normal guy. I don't know about normal. What is normal, right? I play some electronic music in my free time. I DJ a little bit. I produce a little bit. I write a little bit, and play some video games every once in a while. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I've got a cat. I'm a cat person. My cat's name is Athena, the goddess of war.
Very cool. And you're up there in Portland, right?
Yep, and I'm in Portland, Oregon, the beautiful city of roses, Rip City.
All right, so now, Spare the Rod, A Troubling Look at the Troubled Teen Industry. How did you come about your experience with the troubled teen industry?
Well, I went to a boys' home and a boarding school. So I went to a boys' home first, was sent there for a few months, and then was taken out of that, and then a few weeks later was sent off to Agape Boarding School. So I've spent a good 4.5 years about in the industry as a pupil of it.
Now, why were you a troubled teen?
I had some issues growing up. When I was 6 months old, my biological dad shot and murdered my mom and my grandpa when I was still in the crib in the room. And so I think I had some childhood PTSD that went undiagnosed. And my parents tried to do the whole, cast the demon out, go to church and do this, took me to an exorcist and, took me to a couple youth pastors, and they're just trying to find a different way, than, taking me to, a proper doctor for my issues with anger and that started to come out in my teens.
Oh, boy. Okay, so then how did they decide, and what was your experience of being, because, were you transported when you said anything on Dr. Phil, they send those thugs to the house in the middle of the night and pull the kid out? Is that what happened to you? Oh, my God.
Yeah, unfortunately. So the boys' home that I went to, we went to, a quote-unquote counseling session at my dad's work. When my dad was a parole and probation officer, and it was on the weekend when my dad's work wasn't open. And then they just told me that I was going with this guy named Tim Smith, and I ended up in this group home. And so that was the first time that I was sent off. And that was 6 months or so before I was pulled out of there. And then when I was sent to Agape, it was transport agents that came to my house. I came home from school with my dad, and my mom and the other kids had left to go. My dad said they'd gone to go get a movie and pizza, which I thought was really weird. And so then we lived out in the country, good distance from Prineville. So, it was just me and my dad, and these transport agents were in the bathroom when we came in. They came out and were like, "You can do this the easy way or the hard way." And I was looked at my dad, looked at them, realized that there was nowhere to really run. We're out in the middle of nowhere, and just said, "I'll do it the easy way." Yeah.
And where was this, Missouri, when you said it was?
So I was actually in Prineville, Oregon at the time when I was transported to Stockton, Missouri, where Agape is. Yeah.
Okay, so you're out in the middle of nowhere. Now, what year was this?
That was back in 99.
99 wasn't that long ago, man.
Yeah.
And your dad was in probation and parole as an occupation, as a profession,
Yes.
I guess you'd call it, right? And so wouldn't he have access to some kind of resources for people in trouble?
Yeah, so, and that's the thing, he worked in the system, but he'd always say he didn't like the system. He didn't believe that, he didn't want to see me in the system, which, whatever. But he would rather go to like the church and use like the religious outlets than use that. He didn't really believe in like psychology or like mental health issues, or he just didn't believe. He still, as far as I can tell, doesn't believe in some of that. He likes to do this thing where it's like it's all your fault and like put the shame on you kind of really heavy. And it's probably due to some trauma that he's had growing up that he hasn't resolved. These things work in cycles, but
okay. So then what was your?
It doesn't excuse what he's done. That's. I'm not saying that, but yeah.
I do know what you mean. And if it was like 1980, I'd say, well, we didn't know better back in those days. We didn't know any better. But in 2000, we kind of did know better. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're kind of catching up by that, My daughter was born in 2000. Now, what was your experience then when you get there to the Agape Boarding School?
So they put a leg brace on me, these transport agents, and took me there. And so we flew there. And when I got there, I had been under the impression from the transport agents it was going to be like a co-ed place and like, this normal boarding school, It was anything but that. The first few minutes of getting there, they dumped out my bag and started throwing things away. And I can't remember exactly what I said to Mr. Clements and the owner of James, the owner of the program, but Vanderkoy, this Kelly Vanderkoy guy, this big ex-Marine, slapped me across the temple side of the face, knocked me to the ground. I remember picking myself up off the ground in a daze, and he said, "You don't talk to the owner like that." And I realized I was in a really bad place at that moment in time because that was a pretty hard slap, and nobody cared. And I was just very alone, and I realized very vulnerable. And after that, they strip searched me and put me in some tight jeans, an orange shirt, and gave me to a buddy for the buddy system thing. Where you have to be 3 feet in front of the buddy, and they teach you the rules.
Now, you said in your transport they put leg chains on you?
So they put a leg brace on me, and what they did, first they put handcuffs on me until they got to the airport, and then they told me, look, we can do this 1-2 ways. Either if you resist, then we have to take you in a van. If we have to take you in a van, it's going to take a long time, and it's going to suck. So just, put this leg brace on so we can go through the airport. Because the airport obviously is not going to allow you to transport like a prisoner. So,
now, had you ever been taken by the police in handcuffs before?
Yeah, I'd been in handcuffs I think once or twice before. There was an incident where now I realize what happened was I had an incident of emotional deregulation at a young age where my PTSD was acting up and I was triggered and I was just out of control. You know what I mean? I was just screaming, and they ended up calling the cops to come and take care of me because at that point in time I'd actually called the cops on my dad for choking me out, and his boss, the sheriff, told him if he got called again that he'd lose his job. And so not long after that, he sent me to Agape. He's like, I can't keep my hands off you, I guess, so ship me away. But yeah, so that's what they did. They did the leg brace thing, and that's why they did that. And then my dad later, Bill Harper, he started Touchdown Inc., which is his own transport company while I was at Agape, and was actually transporting kids to Agape using my story.
Okay, now, what other kind of problems did you experience there at Agape Boarding School?
Oh, I mean, there's so many, but I mean, when you first get there, you go into boot camp, and I remember boot camp being pretty hellish, pretty intense. It was, we had to do PTs in the morning, PTs in the evening, and PTs were physical training, right? It's a military term. And so kids would pass out, puke, they'd kick kids in the side, and I can't repeat what they would say to the kids because it's just that vile, right? And we're on air. But they would say things. I remember Scott Dumar kicking me in the ribs because I couldn't do any more push-ups, and I was in the volleyball court in the sand, in the hot sand, and the hot sand was searing my hands, and he was calling me every name in the book, you know. And so there's a video of Burton, the pastor for like the longest time there, kicking a kid that's in robes, like a big long robe, as he's running around a track because he wasn't running fast enough. Kicking him in the back and then screaming at him until he got back up. And so there was a lot of abuse. And boot camp, you just constantly worked. If you weren't doing physical training, you were out picking up trash or laying foundations for some of the staff houses that they have now, or some of the buildings that they have. We were always building things, clearing brush, doing things in the boot camp. And then when you get out, you get into the yellow shirt, you can start school, but you're still with a buddy. And so this tiered buddy system that they have allows for a lot of bullying that happens between the students, and you're kind of encouraged almost to rat out your fellow students for things so that you can climb the hierarchy, right? Become like a trusted person or a section leader or a door guy or whatever, right? And so it creates this pressure system inside. And then we were also not allowed to talk to anybody, tell you to each other. So you're not allowed to have friends, make connections. I mean, this is your teenage years when those things are really important. Your brain is developing and you need to learn how to connect with other people. And I was in there for 4 years, and I wasn't able to really do that much over a few things like board games. Sometimes I could bond with other people if like a staff was watching, but you couldn't talk to each other without a staff monitoring it and improving it. So it just we were given a lot of push-ups. They had this punishment called the wall, where you'd have to stare at the wall for days, you know, at a time, while everybody else is doing other things. Just lots of that, lots of pressure, lots of punishment, physical punishment. If you got out of the line and they felt like they wanted to restrain you, they would restrain you and use pressure points to inflict pain. There was paddles. There's the corporal punishment. They would take kids to a room and paddle them, and then they couldn't sit right for, days at a time. So just really intense stuff, really intense work crews. We had to do work crews in the morning. We had to haul rocks and stuff in the morning. Everybody did. And then you would go to school. But yeah, I saw a lot of kids break, and a few of them didn't do so well after they broke. One kid was sitting next to me on the wall, and he just started hitting his face into this window seal, like the edge of the window, until there was just blood on me, and he had cut into his head. And that guy left the school. It was one of the only guys that ever left the school, because they don't kick people out, famously. You can't get kicked out. But he wrote back, supposedly, and it was all like, "I'm fine now." And it just was very obvious to us that this was a fake letter to make us all feel good. This guy was somewhere in the psych unit, not doing well.
What were the ages there? The ages while you were there?
The ages really ranged. So the youngest students that I saw there, I believe we had a 10-year-old at one point. So about 11 to 18. But the 10-year-old, I think, was a little bit odd. But yeah.
So, but you had 11, 12, 13-year-old boys doing forced labor.
Yes, very young. I was, like I said, I was 14.
You were 14
when I got there. Yeah, I was there from 14 to 18. I was 13 when I went to the group home before that for a few months. And so, yeah, I mean, pretty much been out of the house since I was 13 and a half.
When you have an all-boys environment, 18-year-olds with 10 and 11-year-olds, that's a recipe for disaster, right? Bullying, but also sexual battery. Did you witness any of that?
So I didn't witness anything other than what happened to me, and it's still really fuzzy, the memory is. I remember being forced to give another student a BJ in a shower at night when I was trying to go to the bathroom. I don't remember exactly how that happened, but I just remember getting shoved into a shower stall. But that's like all I remember, and I don't remember anybody like students assaulting other students, but I have talked to lots of survivors, and they tell me that this did happen, and it wasn't prevented by the staff. And I've heard stories of staff assaulting students as well, and I believe them.
It's this environment. It's not like they have any compassion for anybody on that property. So, of course, this kind of thing is going to be going on. I really appreciate you coming on here. I know this is difficult to talk about, man. I really appreciate it. You're doing great work. The book is called Spare the Rod, A Troubling Look at the Troubled Teen Industry. And you can find them at Spare the Rod NP for nonprofit.com. Also on Facebook, Exposing Agape Boarding Schools, and also on Twitter as well, Exposing Agape Boarding Schools. Now, this is a Christian operation because agape means, I forget what it means, but do you remember, what does that mean again, agape?
Agape means God's unconditional
love. Right, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Which is ironic, right? Yeah.
Agape love,
terrible
that's right.
misnomer there, right? Like,
oh, my God, the irony.
Terrible.
Was there any kind of a biblical training or worship,
So they are extremists.
Yeah.
So they are Christians. They're not some kind of group that's faking it. They really do believe that. They just take it to an extreme that most don't, and I think that needs to be emphasized. That not all Christians are like these ones, but they definitely. We had chapel every night. A very hellfire and brimstone style preaching, right? That is what we got a lot of, and literally, and so there was a lot of shame in that, like shaming, a lot of heavy messaging. There was never anything really uplifting in it, and that can be kind of hard to listen to every night. We had to memorize scripture. So like especially if we did something wrong, sometimes we'd have to memorize, but we had to do it with, it's actually in the ACE curriculum to memorize certain scriptures and things. And then we had Bible reading in the mornings. So we had a quiet time where we had to read the Bible for, I believe, half an hour in the morning. And sometimes we'd have that, if we got in trouble, we'd have that again. I remember we'd have to be quiet, and the only thing you could do is read your Bible. Just stuff like that. We had church on Wednesday, Sunday, and morning, and Sunday night. We had to dress in suits. Women weren't allowed to wear pants. We weren't allowed to look at the women at all. Like, if we even got caught glancing in a direction of the staff lady, we were in trouble, which was weird. And then, and so they would, like, shave our heads and, like, assimilate us, essentially. We weren't allowed to have anything that made us unique. And they wouldn't allow us, like, I had a guitar, but I wasn't allowed to play anything but hymn music. So very indoctrinating, like everywhere you turned, we weren't allowed to watch the news unless it was like Fox and like what they wanted, and like they would put on football, but no commercials. Like, we weren't allowed to read the newspaper or talk to our friends outside. So like, we're really censored in this bubble where they could just kind of really indoctrinate us. So I was definitely Christian. It was just really extreme.
Now, were there any type of professionals, like who came up with this strategy or policies to form children?
Yeah, honestly, in my book, I cover this a little bit. I believe that these schools, these boarding schools, these residential boarding schools especially, are really descendants from the Native American indigenous schools, essentially. The kind of the same idea that the Catholics and Baptists assimilated the Native teens.
Right.
And they do some of the same things, shave the head, you know what I mean? Make sure that you can't talk in native tongue. You can't do any, like, songs that you might like, or talk to people outside. They monitor everything, work crews, and like just everything to kind of break your spirit and make you conform. And so a lot of these places have some very similar things that ties there. But there's a group called Roll-Off. And the Lester Roll-Off was an evangelist. And he had the Roll-Off homes, which are pretty famously abusive, but Rebecca Homes and some of these other ones. And really, honestly, Agape takes a lot from there. They have a Roll-Off dormitory. They would play Roll-Off sermons sometimes. They basically worship this guy. His picture's up there. And Roll-Off was famous because he got shut down a couple times for child abuse. Eventually, he died in a plane wreck. But he notoriously had a few houses for women that were very abusive, and they believed in harsh punishment, work crews, breaking your spirit for Jesus, basically. And I think that a lot of this has come from there, and they were IFB too, or Independent Fundamental Baptist.
Now, how much was the tuition, the boarding? What were the costs of sending your kid to this Agape boarding school?
I honestly, I don't remember how much it was back then. I do know that I had a trust fund that was left to me from my grandpa that was murdered, right? And it was a $120,000 trust fund. When I got it, I had $60,000 left. So I know that a good chunk of it, almost all of that, was spent on Agape. So it's expensive, somewhere around $4,000 or so, I think, a month or so right now. Not sure if, with their new format, since they're trying to change into group homes or whatever to avoid oversight, but we'll see what happens.
Now what about any of the children at these boardings? Are any of them court ordered to be there?
So sometimes the court does make recommendations to Agape, which I find absolutely disgusting and appalling. But especially with all the news that we've had over the last couple of years, I don't know if that's probably stopped for the most part. I know in Oregon, I worked with Senator Gelser Blumen to help pass 2 laws. One that shut down transport agents unless they're registered at the state, but also to stop kids from being exported through the juvenile system out to other states where they can be abused in places like Agape that don't have as good of child abuse laws, right? So I'm not sure how much that continues. California, I remember a bunch of kids were from all over when I was there, right? There was kids from California, from Florida. We had kids we had a kid that was from China, literally. He was like a foreign exchange. So it's totally possible that some of these kids that are still there right now, which I think there's like 40 or something, we've really cut down the number, are referred by a court or recommended, and instead of going to juvenile, that they do Agape.
Now you can imagine that's so open for corruption and payoffs and kickbacks, all kinds of stuff there. Now with these these teen transport operations. Now, how is that not kidnapping? How could, because I know I couldn't get away with that. Even with the parents' permission, I don't think I can get away with that.
I mean, it feels like human trafficking
to
me. I'm just going to be honest with you. And the trauma that it causes, the lifelong, sometimes trauma, nightmares, night terrors that it causes people. I've talked to survivors that 20, 30 years later, they still have nightmares about somebody coming and taking them to boarding school, or or the boarding school itself. And so there's a lot of damage that can be done by these transport companies. Bill Harper, my dad, my adopted dad even, ran Touchdown Inc., a transport company out of Prineville, and he would hire off-duty cops that would then transport the kids. So they're just using their handcuffs that they use during the day on criminals, probably on these teens. And you can see how that could be a huge conflict of interest, or how they can't be held accountable when we try to figure out, like, a teen says that they were assaulted by one of these transport agents. Well, that's a cop, so then it's their word against that teens. And so it becomes very difficult sometimes to hold them accountable. In Agape, Cedar County Sheriff's Department has several people working for the Sheriff's Department that also work at Agape. They're on both payrolls. And for years, that has stymied our ability to get anybody to investigate Agape because they're the local authority. So, and we see this replicated in other places, like in Kentucky. Kelly Vanderkoy, who I was the boot camp leader and dean of students when I was there originally at Agape. He started his own school called Pilgrim's Rest in Dundee, Kentucky, which is now shut down. And I mean, the local cops there were covering for him. I called, tried to report some things, and they were like, "Oh, they're doing God's work." And so, there's like this network of like old boys, in the cops and stuff that are very okay with this, and it makes it very difficult for us to investigate not only the traffickers but the schools that they're taking these people to. But yeah, what they do is they ed consultants or people that are paid to promote places like Agape. Reach out to struggling parents and say, "I know where I can get your struggling, troubled teen some help." And they go, "You do? That's great," because they're desperate for help, right? Yeah. And they say, "Oh, I'm an ed consultant." So they make it sound like they're officially somebody that knows what they're talking about, right? That's like an expert in this. And really, they're just paid to promote these programs. And so then they promote the program, and then they go, "Well, my son, he's not going to go by himself. And I can't take him there physically." And like, so how do we do this? And so they basically just ship them like property. They have somebody come, handcuff them, or whatever, and then take them. So,
yeah, you've been through
it. Pay him thousands of dollars.
That has to be the most traumatic thing for a 14-year-old kid. A couple of guys come stomping out of the bathroom, putting handcuffs on you. Now,
it is. Yeah.
And then, you talk about free advertising. Dr. Phil. Oh, Dr. Phil, what a kind, caring man. Oh, and he's sending all these kids to these, you know what I mean? And, come on.
He's making a killing off of other people's suffering, and he knows it.
Yeah. Disgraceful. Now, did any of the kids in these places try and escape? I could just imagine, tunneling, all the guys working on a tunnel,
Yes. Yeah, there was lots of escape attempts. I got to tell you, though, they're out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
They're in Stockton, Missouri. There's farmland, like, all around them, pretty much. Stockton's pretty small, too. And they have pretty much paid off all the villagers. It's really creepy. If somebody told me this, I probably wouldn't believe it, but I have one lady there that tried to speak up about Agape, and now people are parking outside her house. People are harassing her autistic brother who's working at the grocery store. They're threatening her. You know what I mean? And so it's this creepy villagers type thing going on. So what Agape does is they go and help all of the people around in that area with free labor projects using the kids. And now they're all paid off. So now whenever a kid runs away, those people bring them back, or we'll report it. And so they've got eyes and ears everywhere, and it's out in the middle of nowhere. So nobody ever makes it out of there. One student did make it to California, and then he got in some kind of gang fight. He came back with a blood pump in his skull and was still at Agape. I guess his mom was like, "Nope, you're going back." And there was a couple more that got away for a little bit and then came back, but I never saw anybody just get away. It never happened.
Reminds me, I had a couple of guests on the White House Boys, the Dozier School for Boys in Florida. You familiar with that?
Yeah, I have heard of that.
Yeah, a bunch of dead bodies they found over there, too. It was like a mass grave. And it was a
mass grave.
Yeah, and I would get emails and stuff. Those kids at that school, they were horrible over there. They deserved what they got all the time.
Wow.
They would tell me that even though the place was a disaster, that the kids the clothes were falling off and rotting off, there no food, slave labor, but they had constant medical examinations. They were being constantly with really fancy equipment. Did you experience anything like that?
Actually, it was the opposite at Agape.
Gotcha. Okay.
And I just want to, this is really actually kind of important. There was a lot of news about Dr. Smock. And he's a pedophile, and he was in trouble in California and in Arizona before he was recently in trouble in Missouri. He has his own practice in Stockton, And a lot of times, like when I was there, he was the only doctor we were brought to. And then there was a guy that played doctor on campus. He like played nurse, but he didn't really have a degree in anything. And we had like a little infirmary. And they would try to do whatever they could in the infirmary, even if they really should take you to the hospital. They would try to do it there because they were worried that if somebody saw you that was like a doctor that wasn't paid off on the, that maybe the abuse would get out, and then they would get investigated, or you'd try to run away. Their excuse is you tried to run away. So they really didn't take you to the doctor. Like you really you toughed it out, and it was pretty bad. Dr. Spock, though, he should have lost his license in California. He married one of the granddaughters of James, the owner, and so he's married into the cult. And so whenever I tried to talk to him about my back and it hurting and about being abused, he told me to shut up if I know what's good for me. And that was a chilling moment where I realized that Agape has tentacles that reach way outside of itself.
How did you injure your back?
So I'm not really sure what happened. I'm pretty sure from what the doctors and from what I've been able to gather that the work crews at Agape broke my back. That I was 6'2" in 6th grade, and I just grew really fast, and then was sent off to this boarding school and boys' home, and I was in the group home was beat up a few times by older boys and slammed around, and then in the at Agape was worked really hard, and I think that work that hauling huge rocks and debris and clearing fields and building houses at a young age, I think it broke my back. I think so. I have a fissure disc in my L5, and it pinches my S1, L1 nerve root for my sciatic nerve. And so in plain English, that means that I get lightning-like pains that go down my left leg. And sometimes I lose some mobility in it or ability to walk on it. And it's just really painful. And so sciatica can be really painful. I've had 2 back surgeries where they removed some of the lamina in the back of my spine to try and give the nerve root a little bit more room in case it inflames. And I've been on all kinds of things for it. But yeah, that's what's wrong. So that actually happened. I woke up and I was 18 years old when my back broke. And so that's how I know it was the school. I hadn't been in any car wrecks. I hadn't been in anything major in my life except for this school. And so, yeah, I've talked to doctors over the years, and they said, yeah, kids like that shouldn't be used for manual labor like that.
Once again, we're talking to Brett Harper about his experience there at the Agape Boarding School. And his book is called Spare the Rod, A Troubling Look at the Troubled Teen Industry. If you want to get a hold of Brett Harper, Spare the Rod info at sparetherodnp.com. Now, Brett, how did you get away from this place? How did you get out of there?
So eventually I graduated high school. I was going to turn 18, and I told him, hey, look, I'm not sticking around. After I turn 18, I'm out of here. So I was like, I've already done all the work because to do it at your own pace, the ACE curriculum, it's really a horrible curriculum. It's full of right-wing dogma and sexism and, just horrible stuff, homophobic stuff, racism. And it's not, it doesn't teach you good science. It teaches you false science. And I had to actually test up and take more math in college because it didn't, so it's just not a good curriculum, but I graduated a year early technically. So that way I wouldn't, have to be there when I was 18. And I turned 18 and flew home.
Went back to your father who was running this transport and...
Yep.
How'd that work out?
He tried to recruit me at first for the transport company, and Agape had tried to keep me there on staff. They tried to groom me. Brian Clemenson had a daughter, and he was trying to set me up. They said maybe his daughter liked me or whatever, and if I stayed, maybe you set me up with her. And so he's tried to do this like groom thing, and they do that. Like there's a few people that have done that where they've married into staff families and stayed on. And I just said no. And then my parents were like, you can stay with us as long as you want. And I was like, I want out of here. And I had a little bit of money left in the trust fund. So I just got an apartment and moved out immediately. And then that's when my back broke. And I had walked onto the college basketball team at COCC. And that was something I felt pretty proud of because I didn't get to play high school ball. And then my back just broke like completely. And I asked my counselor at the school, and he said, it takes some time. And that's really when I started realizing that something bad had happened to me at Agape, right? So.
Then when did you decide, hey, I'm going to expose these guys?
So I tried to talk to my parents back when my back broke and said, hey, this isn't normal for my back to break, and I think it's this manual labor I did. And they just kind of laughed it off and said, it's, lots of teens do work jobs, and sometimes this kind of stuff happens, and not to blame the school, and then put the onus back on me for being sent there. Like, oh, you were a troubled kid, we had to do something with you. So really didn't get anywhere. And then I wanted to sue, but when I talked to doctors and stuff, they kind of told me it'd be really hard to prove that. You know what I mean? I talked to my parents who, talked me out of it. I went on to Yahoo groups back in the day to try and get some alumni. There was like an alumni group on Yahoo groups, and like Niles Short, some other people I think were in there. I pretty much just got laughed out of the group. People were like, oh, whatever, we totally deserve to be there. And I'm like, no, guys, I think like this is bad. We should say something. But the brainwashing that happens from these places, it doesn't immediately wear off. And I think my back and the pain that I was in, the physical pain, created a trauma feedback loop that kind of woke me out of that brainwashing faster than some people. And so later on, more and more people have gotten together over like Facebook and Twitter. I would say 2018 is really when I started hitting it hard again, trying to get, that's when I connected with like some Breaking Code Silence people, some of the WWASP, the WASP survivors, and other people that are from other programs. I connected with a lot of these people through social media, through Reddit, through the Our Troubled Teens on Reddit, and then in various groups, survivor groups on Facebook. And that's really when I started trying to get the word back out about Agape and trying to get my fellow Agape students to speak up to the Kansas City Star back in November of 2020. And then we just kept putting it in the paper, and eventually passed a law to try and rein in Agape, which hasn't worked too great, and we've just continued that fight.
Now, since you've come out with this book and you're doing all this stuff, have you received any kind of threats or intimidation?
Oh, absolutely. So before I even came out with the book, I was basically told, I was bribed. I was told, look, we'll fly you out here. We're changed. Everything's different. You know what I mean? Like, give us a chance to show you how much better the place is. They thought they could, like, kind of swoon me over. They're like, I was working a job, this is years ago, and they said, we'll pay for your time off and your flight and motel. And I was still talking to my dad at the time, and I said no. And then they threatened me. Then they're like, well, if you don't and you keep talking about us, then we're going to tell people that you were a bad teen and that you had issues and that you treat your family like dirt, and we'll get your family to talk about you too. And like they'll come out, and you know what I mean, and like trying to kind of like basically shame or intimidate me into shutting up, and I just never did. Eventually, me and my dad just couldn't talk anymore because I ended up passing that law with Senator Bluin, Gelser Bluin, to shut down transport companies like his. And I just, at that point, we're just on two opposite sides of this.
Wait, so now these transport companies have been put out of business?
Yes, in Oregon. So in Oregon, we made it so that the juvenile system can't really ship kids off unless they have it signed off by like either the there's like a process they have to do. These transport companies now have to register as child care facilities, so they have a whole bunch of different rules. There's mandatory reporters now and a whole bunch of stuff, and they have to pay a fee to register. And so far, all of these little companies that were transporting teens didn't register. Nobody did except for like a state-run company that transports juvenile like prisoners. So we appeared to have shut them down. They could be operating in the shadows, and then we'll have to hopefully they'll enforce that. I don't know that we're doing a great job on that, but yeah. And then of course recently, I think it was like Eric Garland even who does some reporting on this, was reporting on how we have started to connect the dots between places in like California, Florida, Texas, where these kids are coming from and being sent to Agape, and the network that, like I described, of ed consultants that push the schools and then the transport agents that move them and how they work together. So it's all coming together, but there is a network of these individuals. A lot of them are ex-military or off-duty cops or things like that.
Yeah, even some prisoner transport companies are civilian, privately run companies. They wear in uniforms. They look like cops or corrections officers, but it's privately run. And there's so much corruption with this, man. They're just transferring these prisoners back and forth all over the place for no reason. It's just
Yep.
And it's a fortune. It costs a fortune to transfer these people.
Costs a lot of money. It can be very traumatic, especially for teens.
For kids, yeah.
And then there's no accountability. Like when Bill Harper, when my dad would hire off-duty cops, one of them was like from Springfield. I traced him down there, and like it called over there to try and look into that, and they stonewalled me, of course. And so, I mean, anytime there's an abuse report from a kid that says, like, I was abused by this cop, he was in uniform, and they'll wear their uniforms.
Yep.
So it seems like a complete conflict of interest to me, but they'll wear their uniform just to kind of like give off that authority persona, but they're working in a private capacity. So you're right. There's tons of abuse that happens in that.
There was a case down in Florida, and it's on YouTube. You can watch the interrogations. These private civilian transporting prisoners, adult prisoners, I assume. But they ran a scam on this guy in a hookah lounge, okay, tricking him into serving a minor alcohol and then extorted money out of him. It's a pretty interesting video. You can watch the whole. Yeah, oh yeah, man, they're doing all kind of stuff. I can tell you off the air. There's a lot.
I mean, my transport agents offered me a cigarette.
Yeah, see,
and I didn't smoke. I never smoked in my life. They were just like, "You want a cigarette, kid?" I'm like, "I don't smoke." So, yeah.
You can only imagine the abuses going on in a system like that, especially with young girls, with these men. Now, what about long-term effects? I'm sure a lot of people watch this and say, Paris Hilton, she went there, and that Cash Me Outside girl, that Bada Barbie girl, they went through all this, and look at them. She's making $6 million on OnlyFans. She turned out okay. I had her father on the show. What about the long-term effects of this kind of trauma?
So they're definitely the outliers, right? They're not the normal. Paris comes from a family of money, so we have to keep that in mind. That we're not like Paris. We're not cut from the same cloth, a lot of us, and so she definitely had like a leg up on us there, on the normal survivor coming out with trauma and baggage from these places. Cash Me Outside girl, or I kid, she has her following and her rap and stuff that was already kind of there. Dr. Phil really kind of made her in a way, it's messed up the way he sent her there. And I like how she confronted him and continues to confront him. That's a good thing. I appreciate Paris. She follows my stuff on Twitter, and I've talked to some of her team about the national legislation they're trying to do. I don't agree with everything, but I don't really like that she's kind of the face, because a lot of us are not rich. A lot of us are a lot of kids that get home and their family goes, they want nothing to do with them, or they want nothing to do with their family, and so they end up homeless. They end up couch surfing. They end up in a really rough life with and then abusive relationships have been normalized. Right. And so they get out and they're primed for abuse from other people. I've talked to people that 20, 30 years later still have the night terrors, so you can't get good night's sleep. I've had times where I'm afraid to go to sleep because I don't want to go back into a night terror. And so then you just don't get proper sleep, which takes years off your life and drains you emotionally. When you're talking about places like where you're shut in, where you're locked in, like I have fears of like when I go to the hospital, like I've been in a psych hold before. It's been a number of years before I was this bad, but years ago I was in a psych hold, and when they locked the doors, it freaked me out. And I ended up, like, they were going to try and lock the doors, and before they could lock the doors, I ran out in a panic into the parking lot. I ripped off all the EKG stuff because I didn't want to be confined. And so there's a lot of those kind of triggers that'll happen later on in life that just make things really hard. You know what I mean? Like for instance, the authority thing, like I always think authority's out to get me because they really were my whole, you know what I mean? Like, and so sometimes I have like hard time with bosses because I'll assume that they're going to fire me or something, or they're going to find something. So, and then you end up creating that, right, reality for yourself because of your anxiety. So there's a lot of things that different, depending on the trauma that happened. There's sexual things that happen to people. There's psychological things, physical problems. You know, like I personally, my back makes me feel a little bit weird. I'm a young man that has had physical limitations that a lot of young men don't. You know what I mean? And so that can be difficult as well. So it can have long-term effects that are psychological, physical, sexual, all kinds of horrible things that can follow kids. It's not just like an in program they're in danger. They could still have problems from this lifelong.
I tell you, Brett Harper, you really are an inspiration, and I really do appreciate you coming on the show. I know it's not easy to talk about these kind of things. Now, we were talking a little bit off the air. There is a lawsuit against Agape Boarding School, so 22 plaintiffs?
Yeah, and I appreciate the opportunity, by the way. Thank
Sure.
you. There are 22 different lawsuits. There's no class action that I'm aware of.
Oh, really?
There's 22 individual lawsuits, either people that have come forward that are within their statute of limitations, which is pretty slim in Missouri. I think it's like 5 years after you turn 21, or 5 years total. And so these are people that were recently in Agape within, the last few years that are coming forward. There's 22 of them. There's a thing called CaseNet, and you can go on through like the Cedar County, Missouri cases on CaseNet and find Agape Baptist Church. And Agape Boarding School is a DBA of Agape Baptist Church because they want that nonprofit tax status.
Right.
But you can follow along. There's 22 lawsuits. There's also the state doing an injunction against Agape to close it over safety, right? But they've been kind of botching that, but we'll see.
Real quick, this thing about the 5 years statute of limitations after 21 years old, there is a motion you can file that says, hey, I was so messed up by this. I was so damaged by this. I was I wasn't aware of the time. There's ways around that. Okay, 5 years. You can get it up to a couple more years than 5 years. So that's not a hard and fast. You can't get around that. Brett Harper. You can find him on Facebook, Exposing Agape Boarding Schools. You can find him on Twitter. That's where I found him. Once again, Exposing Agape Boarding Schools. The book. Everyone should run out and buy the book, Spare the Rod, A Troubling Look at the Troubled Teen Industry. His website is Spare the Rod, nonprofit.com. And you can email him there at info@sparetherodnp.com. Let me see how we're doing on time here real quick. I think we're out. Yep, we are totally out of time. But Brett Harper, thank you so much. I know how difficult this is to do these kind of interviews, relive all this stuff, but you're doing great work, man. And we thank you. We thank you for this.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
No, anytime, man. Any updates or any developments, give me a call. Put you right back on the air.
Okay.
Good night.